We're going to be talking about Revelation over the next few months. This is not going to be a verse-by-verse study of Revelation by no means. Hopefully what this is going to do is give some insights as to how I think it should be interpreted and things that you need to know as far as if you're studying it on your own, how to approach it. We will talk about a lot of the verses, but there will be places where we will bunch things up, go a little faster at times. But at the first here, I'm going to spend 2, maybe 3 weeks on some ideas that I think are important for knowing how to approach it. I'm not going to talk about when it was written, who wrote it, that sort of thing. That's, for most of us here, that's fairly obvious, and it'll come out as we talk about it. I'm going to talk about some other stuff, though, instead. Some parts of the Bible are pretty straightforward. And I know that skeptics may not always agree that the Bible is even inspired, and they try to discredit the Bible often. And they argue that the book has changed over time and is beyond recognition over the past few centuries. But though various Christian denominations dispute certain passages with varying degrees of interpretation, most of the world's believers agree on many of its passages. But one of the exceptions is the final chapter of the Bible, the book of Revelation. Revelation is probably one part of the Bible with more interpretations than any other. And therefore, over time, all of the wide variety of misinterpretations and beliefs and myths about the book's content have become entangled with each other until it is difficult to discuss Revelation logically with just about anyone. People claim to be experts on the book of Revelation who have never even read the book, let alone the rest of the Bible. Add to this confusion the fact that even popular culture chimes in when it comes to Revelation. For instance, at the beginning of the movie Hunt for Red October, somebody get me a little bottle of water or something, if they get a chance. How many saw Hunt for Red October? All right, good. I picked one that everybody's seen, well, most people. Tell me what's going on here. This is the very beginning. I don't have it again. Aaron? All right. And you can't hear it.
And the seventh angel poured forth his bowl into the air, and a voice cried out from heaven, saying, "It is done." A man with your responsibilities.
I'll read it. It says, look, this is everything he just said. Look, and the first part of it, if you watch closely, was in Russian. All right? It says, look, I come like a thief. Blessed is the one who stays awake and remains clothed, so as not to go naked and be shamefully exposed. Then they gathered the kings together to a place that in the Hebrew is called Armageddon. The seventh angel poured out his bowl on the earth, and out of the temple came a loud voice saying, "It is done." What's the implication? This is the very opening scene of Hunt for Red October. This is Revelation chapter 16, verses 15, 16, and 17. What's the implication?
I think in the movie, the implication is that this new submarine was going to change everything in warfare between Russia and the United States.
Maybe even the end, they're going to cause the end time.
Maybe the end of the world.
Okay, which is, I think, what the implication is in this particular one. Let's go to another movie. Anybody ever seen any of the Terminators? Yep. Revelation chapter 20, verses 11 through 15 is used as a basis of Judgment Day in Terminator series throughout because of its subtle reference to being thrown into the lake of fire. And specifically in Terminator Dark Fate, the new breed of Terminators were called, anybody remember? Rev 9s. Why were they called Rev 9s? Because it is a direct reference to Revelation chapter 9. That's why those Terminators in the last one were called Rev 9s. Not only is this reference an abbreviation for Revelation, Revelation chapter 9 talks specifically a great deal about the apocalypse and various plagues that wipe out humanity. Moving along. Anybody ever seen the TV series Manifest? In season 2, episode 11, police detective Michaela Stone says, she's talking to her brother, who is a scientist, "You must be really desperate for answers, a science guy looking in the Bible." And he answers her back, "I just found this in Revelation. It weirdly echoes his son's, Adrian, apocalypse theory. I saw 3 spirits coming out of the mouth of the dragon, out of the mouth of the beast, out of the mouth of the false prophet." And then he asks, what if these are all signs and wonders? What if this is attempting to lull us into obedience for some end of the world scenario? Coming directly from Revelation chapter 16, verse 13. One more. One of my favorite comedy routines, specifically by this particular artist, comedian. Anybody ever heard of Marty Feldman? One of my favorite comedians. Maybe you've seen this particular routine. Maybe you haven't. But it kind of goes along with what we've been talking about the last couple.
And now Marty Feldman in A Visit to the Vet, or The Beast in the Basket.
Just the one. It's a thing. Oh, yes. It followed me home, you know. I didn't have the heart to send it away. You know how attached you get to them. Point.
Oh, what is it?
Well, to be frank, I'm not quite sure. I looked him up in the Cattle Breeder's Guide. He wasn't there. I looked him up in the Standard Book of Birds. He wasn't there neither. I finally found him in the Book of Revelations.
This is only a smattering, a small number of the Revelation being referenced in pop culture. These kinds of references are literally everywhere. Unfortunately, this is where way too many people obtain their little bit of knowledge that they have or their little bit of understanding of this book. I believe that Revelation is the most misunderstood book in the Bible and maybe the most misunderstood book of all times. And too many people read it independent of the rest of the Bible. They begin with Revelation instead of beginning with Genesis. And that's often the case. I have read books on Revelation and sat through classes on Revelation most of my life. I remember that the first time I ever sat in a formal class was when my brother and I went down, we were in our 20s at the time, to see a man called W.B. West at a lectureship down near Detroit somewhere. The one thing that I remember from that class that I think is important, and we're going to emphasize it, is that he said that Revelation chapter 11, verse 15 is key to its understanding. The kingdom of the world has become the kingdom of the Lord and of his Christ. And I think that is still true. I have remembered that ever since he first said that. But much of what he said, and much of what a lot of other people have said or books have said, I no longer think a lot of it is accurate. And I think that you go on, you see things on television about people teaching Revelation, or you read most of the books on Revelation that you see, and they're utter nonsense. They're not following simple rules of interpreting literature. And you have to do that when you are studying Revelation. I remember as far back as the fifth grade, arguing with a kid over what the 144,000 was. Neither of us knew what we were talking about at the time. Although I think I did know a little more than him, but I was in the fifth grade, okay? Didn't know a lot about it at the time, but we argued over that one thing. What was the 144,000? And that's the way a lot of people approach Revelation, is they pick out one part of it and they argue about what does that one thing mean. There are lots of doctrines that are in there that need to be discussed and are hot button issues. Pre and post millennialism, 666, the beast, the false prophets, the various women, the dragon, the lion, the lamb, Armageddon. These are all important things that a lot of people think they know what they are, but they don't. If you have been in a lot of my classes, any of my classes over the past 15 plus years, then you know that there's something I've always asked you to remember, and I'm going to ask you to remember it in this class also. The first of all is the subject of the Bible. Anybody remember that? You've forgotten already? I know that there's people in here that have been in those classes.
You're talking about sentence.
What's the subject? It's actually one word. God. Thank you. What is the main theme? One word. Son. Seed. Specifically, you don't know till the end of the book who that is. If you read the book like you should read the book, you don't know until you're almost to the end what that seed is. You know as you progress that it's a son. You even know some attributes of that son. But if you're reading the book as a book from Genesis to Revelation, it's a seed. That's what's talked about at the beginning of Genesis. And that's what they were looking for, was that seed. We don't know that it's Jesus till the end. Okay? And then it has a storyline that tells us one thing and one thing only in various ways, over and over and over again. It is the story that tells us how a holy and righteous God can once again dwell with his unholy images. Revelation must be read, must be interpreted, must be understood as the last chapter of this very long story, with the same subject, with the same theme, and with the same goals. There's a man named John Lennox that put it this way, and I like what he says. One of the great failings when reading the Bible is to be so concerned with the details of a given passage and how it is applied that we don't actually take the time to understand the overall flow of the narrative itself. Kind of like the saying, we don't see the forest for the trees. And we don't. Very often. This is especially true with Revelation. Starting right now and over the next week or two, I'm going to give some examples from a wide variety of literature and movies and TV shows that show some points that I think are important in how we approach it. Because we know this from common culture and we don't always apply it to the book of Revelation. The first one I'm going to talk about is Star Wars. Anybody ever watched all 11 Star Wars? All 11. I mean, there's like the 9 original plus those 2. Yeah. George Lucas conceived the idea of the space oddity back in 1971 when he was in his mid-20s. The first trilogy of the initial 9 was released in 1977. The last of what turned out to be an 11-part series instead of a 9 was released just 2 years ago, 2019. That is 48 years from conception to completion. One of the problems people had was that the series was not put out in the order of the storyline. And if you can see up there, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, or we got 1, 2, 3, then the 2 added ones that were important to know what was going on into the 4th, 5th, 6th, and all the way up through the 9th. There's 11 altogether. But which ones were put out first? 4, 5, and 6. Now, I know there's lots of reasons why he did that. Okay? It was important for him to do that. First of all, he couldn't start at the beginning and use the same people, so he chose the middle and then work his way back and then work his way forward. But there was a problem with guys like me that started watching this when they were in their 20s, and then he put the last one out when I'm in, or the next group came out, the group that was the 1, 2, and 3 came out when I was in my late 40s. I forgot all of it. I don't even know who the characters are now. That's a long period of time just for a guy like me. A few years ago, 2 or 3 winters ago, I found all 11 of these, and I watched them in order for the first time. I get it now. Okay? I understand what's going on. As this series was being released, no one could fully understand exactly what was coming next or what the end game was of the entire series. It was only in hindsight that this sci-fi fantasy could be studied and fully understood. A couple of winters ago, I had a chance to do that, like I just said. What you found out when you did that, the Force was not exactly what you thought from the very beginning with the first episode that came out. And the savior of the whole thing was not who you thought it was going to be, because it wasn't Han Solo, it wasn't Obi-Wan, it wasn't Yoda, it wasn't even Luke Skywalker. You get to the end of the thing, and it was Luke's niece named Rey. Now, I don't know if that was an add-on because of the times and made it, I don't know, but it wasn't until then that you really even knew. Compare. If you haven't seen these, too bad. Plug your ears. I'll tell you to plug your ears from now on. Compare this with the Bible. God conceived of a story written within its pages long before man was even aware that there was a story. It was executed over thousands of years. Not always is it even in chronological order. I mean, we're not exactly sure when Job was written. We've got some ideas. And if you take the Kings and the Chronicles and then add the prophets to it, you actually need to shuffle those like a deck. I've got some books that do that, and someday I might even get the gumption to teach a class that puts that all in order. But all those prophets need to be put in where the Kings and the Chronicles, they speak and prophesy to those specific kings that are talked in 1st and 2nd Kings. But it's not written as a long story that way. It's written as pieces that you have to put together. Like we have discussed before, God reveals himself in various ways throughout the whole book. We've got the seed, which is the Son, which is first introduced in Genesis 3 and clarified page after page, chapter after chapter, book after book over the course of the entire Bible. And like Star Wars, the Savior, the seed, if you read it from the beginning, not knowing the end, too often we've already read the end of the book, haven't we? But if you read it like you haven't, that you don't know the end of the book, the seed will turn out to be someone that is not who you think it is. Think about it that way. Okay? All through the Old Testament, they thought they knew who the seed was in various places, at various times. Eve thought she did. And it continued from there. And if we were reading it for the first time, we wouldn't know either. Therefore, just like George Lucas developed his themes and symbols over the course of 48 years, so the author of the Bible, God himself, did the same thing. Over thousands of years, God used various literary devices and developed symbols to perfect his meaning for those who have eyes to hear, or eyes to see, and ears to hear. How do we recognize who's who in this kind of book or this kind of movie? What are the hints and the clues that point us in the right direction? And part of this has to do with the symbols that the author uses. For instance, which is the good guy and which is the bad guy? This is a simple one. How do you know?
John Wayne was always the good guy.
What's that?
John Wayne was always the good guy.
What if we didn't know John Wayne? White hats versus black hats, absolutely. Okay? Now, notice that by the time we get to 310 to Yuma, which is, I really like that movie, the hats aren't exactly pure white and black anymore. All right? They're a little bit shady because both of them do good and both of them do bad. That's a symbol in and of itself. All right. What about these? How do you know who's the good guy and who's the bad guy? Same thing, right? What about this one, though? Same guy. Once in black and once in white. What does that mean? Really? Nobody knows? We need to know this. There was a while when he was in the dark side. They changed him. Okay? That's a symbol. And here's how we know. What do you see there? You see white on the inside. We only revealed that for a short time. That tells us that Luke is finding his way back. Okay? These are symbols. These are powerful. These are intended by the person that wrote it. George Lucas didn't do this by accident. It's important. Every good story uses symbols to help convey the meaning, message, and help cultivate a deeper meaning in what it is he's trying to tell in the story. Color is but one of these kinds of symbols. For instance, let's give a couple more on color here. In the top one, the movie Dick Tracy, the guy that wrote that, used yellow. There was a yellow amber type color throughout most of that film. And it was the color of caution, power, energy, and anxiety. Shawshank Redemption, blue, was the dominant color. It's tranquil. It is like soft blanket of sadness. Throughout Shawshank Redemption, the film is dominated with blue. Here's another one. What color was dominant in The Godfather? Nope. Nope. There is an amber glow, an orange type glow. Okay? Not amber, sorry. A pastel orange type glow. Warmth, welcoming, pumpkins, if you will. Or, in the opening scene of The Godfather, we've got the color, not only the color orange, but we've got the oranges themselves, the fruit, symbolized, used as symbols throughout the movie. When the Godfather gets shot in the street, he buys oranges, which are scattered on the ground. Before the horse head shows up in the guy's bed, we see an orange at the table when they're eating dinner. The orange shows up at the meeting of the 5 families near the mob bosses who are going to get whacked. There's a billboard for Florida oranges right before Sonny gets gunned down in his car. And at the very end, when Vito dies, he is peeling an orange and putting the rind in his mouth to make funny faces at his grandson. Oranges all through this. And it's on purpose. How many never knew that? Listen, we don't pay attention enough to our films. Those guys are trying to tell us other things than just entertaining us.
But don't you think it's a little hypocritical
What?
that George Lucas is dark and white and, you know, the mood and
I don't,
you know, he's trying to
listen, all I'm trying,
say good.
you're going to have to say God is hypocritical because you're going to use symbols just like this. That's going to be my point.
Yeah, but then George Lucas.
Everybody follows what the leader does. Remember that old commercial that says, you do what I do, I don't do what you do? Everybody's doing what God did. I'll get to that later. No, I don't think it is, but that's just my opinion.
Well, let's go on. Maybe
Thank you.
change my mind, but right now.
Other kinds of symbols are used by authors and playwrights. I'm going to use another example, The Wizard of Oz. Symbolisms in The Wizard of Oz are plentiful. Most of us think of The Wizard of Oz as being a children's story, but in reality, it's not. Originally, the the movie was an adaptation of L. Frank Baum's 1900 children's fantasy called The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. Yes, on one level, it was intended to entertain children, but the author's true intention was political. The Wizard of Oz is more like Animal Farm, if you guys remember that, than it is like Humpty Dumpty. The Wizard of Oz is an allegory or a metaphor for the political, economic, and social events of America in the 1890s. Like today, in the 1890s, the country was going through a populist movement driven by changes in the monetary system. That was the important thing back then. The political hot topic. The country had been on the gold standard since its inception, I think. But there were many powerful people at that time that successfully took United States off gold and silver, and therefore made it so that paper money was not backed by something solid and tangible. No longer did a paper dollar need to be backed by a particular weight in gold or silver. Instead, its value could be fluctuated by powerful people in high places, depending on the number of paper dollars being printed. Isn't that kind of prophetic of what's going on today? All right. Here are some of the examples of symbolism that were used in that book that we still see today. Dorothy was the average American. Her character symbolized the best that America had to offer. The scarecrow was the farmers. He thinks he doesn't have a brain because he's uneducated and seemingly ignorant, but in the end, the scarecrow is the character that shows a good deal of common sense. Tin Man represents the dehumanized and mistreated factory worker who had his self-worth chipped away by outside forces. Gone are the craftsmen of the previous period, especially from the 1800s and before. He represents the suffering that went on through the factory system and the economy of the time. It is why he's covered with rust when he's found by Dorothy and the Scarecrow, representing the high levels of unemployment that were prevalent at the time. The Cowardly Lion actually is probably a specific person, William Jennings Bryan, who was a hero of that populist movement. The Wicked Witches, they're interpreted as the major financial and political interests that held sway over the American politics. When Dorothy's house falls on the Wicked Witch of the East, it's a reference to smashing Wall Street's power. Did you know this before? You're shaking your head a lot. No? I just maybe you'd read that somewhere. I don't know. Just asking. Dorothy's Slippers. This is an important one, but we don't get it from the movie story because Dorothy's Slippers were not red in the book. That was added simply because of Technicolor at the time so that they could make them bright and shiny Anybody want to guess what the color of the slippers were? Silver. They were silver slippers in the original book because silver was part of that monetary standard. She wore the silver. The common person could afford silver. She wore the silver slippers around. The Emerald City, I guess I better catch up. The Emerald City and the Royal Palace are placeholders for Washington, D.C. and the White House. The seats of political power. The fact that it is green for a reason. Money. Money, 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 money. Exactly. The greenback dollar. And the wizard himself, unsurprisingly, stood for those that work behind the scene pulling the levers. In the story, the wizard is a charlatan who has convinced everybody around him that he wields great power, but he doesn't. In fact, he's not powerful enough even to kill the Wicked Witch himself, so he asked Dorothy to do it. Yellow. What do you think yellow is in this? Gold, absolutely. So why is it called the Wizard of Oz? Because OZ is the abbreviation for ounce, which is what gold and silver are measured in. Okay? The whole story is about something that we don't even know because we don't know the background. And that's the way I'm trying to get you to see that we don't always interpret Revelation correctly because we don't know the background. Yes? Please don't make this long. I've got to get done. I've heard that before.
I can see how the person reading that book around 1900 could have seen these themes popping up.
I'm glad you brought that up, Terry. That is important, and we're going to get to that a lot. But I'm going to give a short explanation to save us some time.
That's not my question. My question is, do you really think that anybody who saw the movie in what was the middle
No.
of the 80s,
And I compare that.
I don't think anybody
I'm going to compare that.
stuff.
Terry, I'm going to compare that to something that's important. And the important is that nobody understands Revelation because they don't know the background of it either.
Okay.
That's my whole point.
So you're agreeing with me? That
For once?
For the book, you could maybe see that if you read it in 1900, more or less. A lot of
Absolutely.
people have no idea who William Jennings Bryan was or the Bible
I do.
Gold Standard.
I've read a lot about Williams.
That was a huge thing.
You're taking too long, Terry. Sorry.
I'm done.
I'm not trying to be rude. I got 2 more pages. If you do not know what was happening in politics at the time when the book was written, then you don't know what the book is actually about. Background is extremely important in interpreting a book correctly. And that is also true of Revelation. Slide. Another movie, 1917. Anybody seen this one? It's a war movie about World War I. 2 specific people that are British soldiers, Schofield and Blake, are put on an impossible mission. And this is a true story, actually. At least most of it is, as best they can put it together. Race to try to save some of their fellow soldiers. They have to go through enemy territory to do that. There are 2 important things to know about this film as you watch it. The first one is kind of a technical thing. It's photographed, it's filmed from a standpoint of one camera, never changing angles. So it's like one continuous long film. That's not been done very much in film ever before by a few people that made movies, but this one is outstanding in that. The other thing is that there is a symbol in it that goes throughout the entire movie, and you're supposed to know this, but most people don't. How many have seen the movie? 1917. All right, I'm going to go through a series of 8 slides. Don't say it till the end, but I want you to see if you can come up with the symbol. What's the symbol? Trees. In fact, let me find this. The viewer is given a big hint about 30 minutes into the movie when one of the soldiers, just before they leave to cross into enemy lines, one of his ranking soldiers says, "Keep your eyes on the trees." That's an important line. And if you don't know that line, or you missed it, you won't know what's going on. This is the exact opening scene, and that is the exact ending of the movie. Trees in this movie are used for many different things. Cherry blossoms represent happiness. Dead trees show up at danger points. There's trees that are used for cover. There's trees that are used for hiding, safe haven. And there's trees that are used for rest. The tree is important in that movie, and it was put in there on purpose. And when an author uses a symbol, it is on purpose, and its use is learned by paying attention throughout the story. Only fully understood when you go back and rewatch the movie or reread the book in order to find them. As you see them, you might not notice them the first time. They are meant to be to add meaning and depth that the author is trying to convey. But this happens only if you're paying attention. You see what doesn't happen? Never. An author never does this. An author never comes right out with a trumpet sound and a loud voice and says, "Hey, I'm showing you a symbol right now, pay attention." Symbols are always subtle. And the symbols we see in the Old Testament are that way. But as we read the book over and over again, we're supposed to be able to pick those out. And to understand Revelation, we need to know those symbols, or we miss a lot. That's going to be the point of this class. One of the points of this class. When symbols are used correctly, they tie pieces of the story together, and there's symbols used, and there are symbols used in the Bible that do the same thing. And here is a few of those. We have serpents and dragons and seeds and suns and beasts and water and rivers and trees and numbers and colors and lambs and lions, and that list is long. Very, very long. But where do we get the first inklings and the development of those things as symbols? We get it right from Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, etc., 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 all the way through the rest of the Bible. That's where those symbols are developed, so that by the time we get to Revelation, we understand Revelation because we know what the book is about. And nobody wants to spend the time to do that. And that's why there are so many sensational, wrong explanations of Revelation. Revelation is a book full of symbols. Everything is communicated that way. But if you misinterpret some or all of the symbols, then you misinterpret the whole book. So how do we know what these symbols stand for? The key is, as with any other piece of literature, is to pay attention throughout the whole book. In the book's previous chapters, that's where the author will subtly define what it is he's trying to get across. Okay? We're going to talk more about this next week and probably the following week also. Now, any questions? All right. Thank you.